Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Coach Rob Podcast Network. It's episode number 10 of Navigating Amateur Motocross, brought to you by our dear friends at Precision Transport. Derek, how you doing, buddy?
Good, Rob. How are you, man? Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. We've survived Loretta's. We've survived the World of Vets, and now we sit on the cusp of the holidays, and then I guess we run into Gainesville for a while, and then little sabbatical to March. But fill me in. What's been going on in your world these last couple months?
Just this last couple months for me has been a huge block of like new R&D stuff. So the last few years, you get bogged down in just you develop something, and then you have your business, and you're just trying to get your business motors out the door and yada yada yada. And I've been like kind of bored, to be honest, on the development side because I haven't had a new exciting. I haven't really innovated on something totally new. Like we've basically gotten a lot of projects to the point where there's just tiny, tiny little things you're searching for. And it's frustrating because you're basically looking for a bunch of needles in a haystack, right? We've already done all the low hanging fruit. So anyway, I decided to re-up some things I've always wanted to play with. I haven't even shared any of this stuff with you, but been working really hard on the back end on new development stuff that I've always been interested in, but I feel like I didn't have manufacturing resource on. And so now with the way the world works and CNC machines being more readily available everywhere and that technology taking off and then more people putting those services on the internet, we're able to say, hey, maybe I want this part made. Can I get it done and get it for a relatively decent price? Whereas back in the day, I mean, it just was impossible. So yeah, I mean, I think today's show, you said you wanted to ask me a bunch about some of that stuff. So maybe some of that will come up in the topics. But yeah, lately for me, I've been doing a ton of learning on just stuff I never had time to put effort into. So
Very cool. Very cool. Well, like you and I talked about off the record, I try to make sure 2 days a week is new business development. And I try to do that throughout the entire year for that exact reason, because you'll get a couple projects started. Unfortunately, it never comes full circle and gets completed. So I'm glad that you're getting a chance to do that because unfortunately with your type of work, it's everybody wants everything yesterday. And not because it's always on purpose, something could have grenaded accidentally, unexpectedly, or whatever. So I'm glad you're at least able to, especially for you, because you're the guy that likes to tinker and likes to test things, whether it's you and your dad creating unique devices to measure. I know that you really enjoy that time with your dad. So glad you're getting a chance to do it.
Yeah, it's been neat. And hopefully on our social media, we'll be publishing some more of what we got going on in the near future, plus YouTube. But one of these ideas, I had this idea this week, and I can't believe I didn't think of it about 5 years ago or 10 years ago, because I was immersed in this stuff 10 years ago. And I guess you get stuck in what you're doing. So for example, I posted a video on our Instagram story the other day, and I'll do a whole YouTube feature on it when I think we're at a point where I like it, of a 3D model of it, like a cylinder head port for a 4-stroke. And I've been working hard at that. And then if you've ever tried to do that, it's hard to do. Like at least for me, the modeling side of trying to model a port because it's a complex shape. And so I've been working on that process of how do I do this better, right? And then number two, with modern manufacturing, for example, with 3D printing, how can we leverage that to make this a skill set worthwhile for me? So anyway, I've been working on a model, and the idea I had, and I'll show it on this podcast because I don't think we have enough guys who are in competition with me on our podcast. But someday, when we decide to release it to YouTube, it's going to be like, I think a light bulb's going to go off for some guys, and maybe I'm just late to the party. But I want to take that 3D model, and because you can 3D print stuff easily and rapidly, I want to 3D print various ports and port shapes that normally we would have to hand grind and epoxy and use a real head. I'm going to just 3D print it and then have interchangeable ports that I can clip on and clip off and just instantly be able to flow concepts and ideas without having to actually use a head. So
Cool.
We'll model it all out, and then we have, we'll probably show how we're going to do that in our YouTube video, but then just be able to quick change the parts onto a model of your head, which is accurate, and then be able to rapidly innovate what normally would take us a little bit more time, but B, you can ruin a part just as quickly as you can make it better. And so as a shop, that's part of your wrapped cost, right? It's like, okay, let me test this head. Oh, that's the wrong way to go. Well, guess what? It's no longer perfect. And so that's an unfortunate side, a very expensive side of our business. And I'm trying to, this is a way that, so anyway, I'm excited about it.
That's cool.
It took me like 5 days of like after dinner till like 2 a.m. because you get wrapped up in it of figuring out how to do some of this stuff.
Yep.
And then it's funny once you figure it out, like I had to, okay, let me start from scratch again and see if, and boom, you're like done in 2 hours, right?
Yes.
So you
Yep.
just learn, and all of a sudden the process becomes, a little bit quicker. But I think I cannot wait to share that. Even if it doesn't really even yield dividends, because we've already worked hard at this stuff, but I just think that idea and concept was really, really cool.
Well, what you just mentioned right there is something that I think is so cool. So many people, and we've teased about this, they go to school and then they act surprised that they're dumb. Everybody goes to school dumb and you become smart. Everyone goes to the gym weak and becomes strong. Everybody's got to understand what poverty feels like, or at least struggle bus to understand and appreciate having money. And that's what I love. It takes hours, right? What is it, 10,000 hours to become a subject matter expert? But most people aren't willing to be patient for that 6 months to 6 years to 16 years. But that's what makes you good. And I think that's one of the things that you do such a great job on. I was exposed to AI 5 years ago, and I'm never one that I'm like, okay, I don't understand it. What do they always say? We tend to fear what we don't understand. I'm like, well, I refuse to be afraid of it. I'm gonna figure out what's going on. And literally just last week, we launched our first Coach Rob Knowledge Bot, and we've got about almost 900 hours just in the technology, not counting all the podcasts, all the webinars, all the articles. We had to feed it over 100,000 pages of content. But my point is this: had to put all the time in on the podcast for the last 10 years, had to write the articles. Now you have something to work with. It's that, like you were saying, you get dinner till 2 a.m. That's the part that nobody understands. And when you get it out there and you smash it with great ideas and it becomes a catalyst of all kinds of new inventions and technology, it'll be those 2 a.m. going to bed and even still staring at the ceiling fan because your brain's going a mile a minute.
It's neat,
So
like you said, AI.
congratulations.
Like I wish we could, and I'm sure we can. I need to just put the time in, like you did, to use that for some of the stuff we do, right? Like AI
Mm-hmm.
could definitely rapidly innovate certain design decisions, right?
Yep.
And use the computational power that exists. But yeah, that it's neat that you say that, because like that when you said that you've done that, you have to have the body of work for the AI to analyze.
Well, here's the key that I didn't realize, and it's relevant to what you're saying right there. We had to keep the knowledge bot off of the internet. So,
Yeah,
for example,
100%. Yeah,
you want to make sure it doesn't go out and get the wrong information convoluted. So, literally, we fed it nothing but my podcast, articles, webinars, and that type of content.
yeah.
And that's what I think is so cool with what you're doing. Every hour that you're doing what you're doing right now becomes the stuff that the bot's going to be fed. Therefore, when you're given an interpretation, should I speed up the suspension or slow it down? Well, what's the real definition of stiffness and suspension? You just ask the bot, you've already articulated this a million times. Well, now we park that knowledge bot on the HP website underneath a paywall. Not that we're trying to keep the information behind anybody, but if somebody really wants the knowledge, then you've got to be willing to invest in yourself. That's why I think it's so important to put it behind a paywall, because there's a lot of people that will call you up, ask you for a lot of knowledge, and then never buy a part from you. And again, we are in the business of making money, but I'm amazed how many guys will call you up, whether it's a particular suspension piece or a motor piece, you sell it. They're like, hey, Derek, thanks for the knowledge. And then go over here and buy it from somebody else. That's cool. Everybody has the right to buy where you want to buy from. But where's the courteous and the respect of, well, dude, Derek helped you out, and then you didn't even give him the courtesy of purchasing the product from him?
Yeah, that's one thing we've learned through YouTube has been weird.
Yeah.
I don't know. I need to get better at the answer to this, which is essentially, and I'm thankful. Like if you see our YouTube videos and you find value, and then you have a question for us, and it's functional, great. We are here to try and help. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people think that that's my only focus and goal to YouTube. No, this is a business, and so when you call up and say you're so helpful on the internet, can I ask you a question? Yes, you can, and I can try to be helpful. But if that question is not going to lead to business through us, then why are you calling me? Well, you sound like you'll answer, or you have the answer, and I can get it from you. I get that, and we are trying to be helpful. But at the same time, you got to understand that I'm not just some guy that's your friend because I want to be friendly. This is a business. Just saying,
It is a
like this is
business.
a
Yep.
business, and so that knowledge that I do have and those answers I do have cost me a fortune to acquire. And you can look at, I heard somebody said this years ago, and it hadn't, when you're a business owner like I had been, where you're just grinding and grinding towards a goal of not even money, a goal of success,
Yes.
you don't value your time correctly.
Mhm.
And so you've done, if you have a habit of that, then all of a sudden you come into somebody asks you for your time and you give it away. But like the reality is, somebody said to me was, Derek, your time is your life. So you need to value it as such. So if you are not getting back out of it what you expect out of your time, right? If it's not, if I have free time available to go do what I want to do, that's extremely valuable to me, right? So I think that that's something. It was a realization it took me a long time to really come to grasp with, which is that if you're giving your time away for free when you could be utilizing it for yourself, that's invaluable. There's no price on that, right? You can't pay me enough for that.
Exactly. And that's the whole genesis behind this whole podcast series is we know that our listeners are the ones that want the straightest line between point A and point C. And like we have a corporate wellness program and we work directly with the CEOs because we know that they're looking at bottom line. They want healthy employees, they want happy people, they want them to pay, stay, and refer. But at the end of the day, it's a business and a business can only run when it's profitable. That's what I love about our listeners. They want the quickest, not the cheat, that they don't want a cheating route. They just don't want to go figure it out, the school of hard knocks. Hey, Derek's willing to articulate how to set a bike up, how to properly heat cycle a motor, what's most important, suspension or motor. How do I get the most out of tweaking this? Do I need to detune a bike? Is it really as fast as I think it is, or am I just sucking on a dirt bike? Our listeners thrive on that. And it's exact clientele that we have in our corporate wellness. People who run businesses, they value time more than money. And that's what I love about this. And I love what you're willing to share. It's interesting to me, like I've had some athletes I've worked with in the past who we had, our business has stayed the mission of we're an amateur development program. And when we've had athletes that we've had to part ways with because they've gone pro, there's no hard feelings. But if you want to pay for our pro program, I'm happy to do that for you. But I can't have you pulling from the resources of our amateur development program when that's what the program is. When they're getting stuff for free, boy, they talk about how good our energy fuel is and our supplements and everything else. But then when it comes time for them to actually purchase it, here's the kick in the groin. I know that our product's the best, but now that they're not getting it for free, they go buy an inferior product instead of giving us the respect of, hey, you've helped me out for the last 5 years. You've put $100,000 into me, but now I'm going to go buy something from somebody else because I'm jaded that you no longer give me everything for free.
Yeah, and you said something. It took me forever to. This is a business standpoint. So if you hear this and you think it's harsh or mean as a consumer, then this is behind the veil from the viewpoint of a business owner, right? So basically, if you want to work with me because I'm discounted, if I gave you a discount, that's the selling factor for you to come to HP. I don't want to work with you.
Exactly.
What we sell on is performance.
Results.
We want results for you. We demand results out of ourselves at the shop. So we test and we make sure that it works and we understand how it works. It's not just the what, it's the why and the how. And when you have those answers, then it's easy to replicate results. So when a new bike comes out, we know how to get to where we were very quickly or better because we don't guess on how we get here. And so, of course, we do at times, right? We're constantly learning. But then when you guess and it works, and you guess that it didn't work, the two options, then you have to find out, okay, this worked and I don't know why. Let me find out why it did work. And that's to us has always been, and to me, that's always been the fundamental question. But like to your end is, if you want to work, like you said, where's the loyalty? And it is what it is. Like I get this how the world works, but somebody gave you a lot of something free for a long time and now you have to pay and you're going to go pay someone else. What the hell are you doing? If you had a good relationship, why not just pay the money?
That attitude behind it, because you're no longer giving me something for free. My passive aggressive approach is to go buy an inferior product from somebody else to give you the middle finger. I seriously laugh about it because I'm like, okay, so I showed you that the product works. I gave it to you for 5 years. And now your way of getting back at us is to not, the only person you're hurting is yourself.
Yeah, and that's ultimately the sad route, right? And good, like in our industry, I personally fully understand that people are always chasing something. So you're always looking for the greener grass. That's human psychology. So sure, you can switch up your company. You can go here and you can go there. It is what it is, right? This is a round robin of an industry. It's not ideal, but this is sad to say, the most successful racers we've ever had, the amateur standpoint, have always been our longest term customers.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's plenty of examples I've had where people leave us and become less successful, significantly so. Now, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot more to the story on that, right? Meaning, you've worked with an athlete, we'll talk names at the moment, but that individual has really fallen off where they were a few years ago. They're still a great athlete, but at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, unfortunately for them, there's more behind the scenes than, oh, they fell off because they lost left HP or they left Coach Rob.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's always more to the scene. I'm not saying that I'm responsible for someone's success. Ultimately, and this is what I want this podcast to be about, you, the rider, you, the client, you, the person, are ultimately responsible for your success. We can just help you get there, and Coach Rob can just help you get there, right? And the people you surround yourself with are actually fundamentally the most important aspect of your success in life and in racing and in everything. So, yeah,
Well, let me say
100%
this
right.
let me say it at the expense of sounding disrespectful. I just posted yesterday on social media. We're promoting our winter camps with Jamie Hunkler out of the Northeast area. And one of the things that I say to all my coaches is what's keeping you from winning a national championship isn't whether you're standing up or sitting down in a corner. That's exactly what I put in the social media. It isn't whether you're using one or two fingers. It isn't exclusively about line choice. It's the things that we're talking about. Hey, what caused you to melt at Loretta's? Were you a mental mushroom? Did you overheat? Did you run out of energy? Did you cramp up? Did you get injured? Right. So when you look at the things that stood between where you're at and where you want to go, now again, I'm not holding it with the amount of resources that you and I make available for free on the internet. We do this podcast. And again, we're not looking for yada boys and pats on the back. What we're talking about is the mindset. What we want to do is give, and it goes back to the corporate world. Top corporations, they want the straightest line between point A and point C, and they're willing to pay a premium to get that accomplished in the most economical way possible. Because if I can avoid cramping, if I can avoid grenading a motor, if I can avoid, being a mental mushroom, if I can avoid, setting my bike up the wrong way, which ended up making me more fatigued, which caused me to slow down. Constantly physical against the mechanical, mechanical against the physical. I mean, what do we say all the time? What's a perfect day for you and I? That bike runs the way it's dynoed. You've got it balanced. You push the bike to its potential, and when the track pushes back, the physical athlete can handle it, races it from start to finish, from first to last moto, championship done. Now,
Yep.
that I've been doing it 37 years. You've been doing it for decades yourself. We know the formula and the process, but what's interesting is when we get the success, people find a way to undermine it.
All
Like
the time.
like
All
we
the time.
said, if I have an athlete, which we've had several that have come back, hey, we should have listened to you 5 years ago. Our doctor said we're not eating enough, we're not sleeping enough. I'm not going to be the turkey that says I told you so. But it breaks my heart that now you come back 5 years later, you want me to give up current resources, working with someone who's a sponge to knowledge, a young parent who's like, my little guy or girl is definitely serious. I'm like, perfect. I'll show you the blueprint on what works, stick to it closely. And now I'll make sure that whatever your riding coach in your facility wants, you can do it for as much as he or she asks you to do it. Good, great. We get the results. Too cool for school. And then the model repeats itself over and
Yep.
over again. So,
Yep.
hey,
I know
when I
this. You
was,
had said last podcast you wanted to, we talked a lot on the human physiological side, and we could have.
yep,
I mean, we literally could talk for years on the subject
yes,
almost.
sir.
You had some questions you had come up. You said you're asked. Some kind of pre-show. You had said, "Hey, what about this? What about that?"
Well, I was fortunate enough. I got flown out to Glen Helen to go to World Vets, and I love walking the pits. And I was very fortunate, got a chance to talk to a lot of good guys. I can't get over the amount of people who ask me questions that's in your wheelhouse. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll make a list of everything we've talked about, and I'll get with Derek and we'll do the best we can. So if you're okay with it, I'd like to spend today's show going through whether we get through two, three, or all of them. The first question that came up was, in your opinion, how do you even begin to set a bike up? We call it balanced. We call it, it's handling correctly. I don't want to insult your intelligence, but I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to make an assumption that maybe I shouldn't. You probably have a process in the system, and I was just curious. Are you comfortable elaborating on that, even if it's just a Cliff Note version?
Yeah, certainly. I say this. People just don't want to hear it because they want the easy button, and they want to hope that a company has already done this process for them. But when you really think about it, how could a company possibly ride the way you want your bike to ride for you? So you may not know what you want, which is the biggest challenge that every racer has, but you certainly know when you hop on something and you're like, I hate that. And one of the best tools that I ever had, because luckily as a shop back when I rode a lot, I could ride everybody's bike. Hey, ride my bike, ride my bike, ride my bike. So I got to go ride every brand, every color, from brand new in stock to somebody's mod bike to some other shop suspension. We really got lucky there. If you have opportunity to do that, do it in a respectful manner. If somebody lets you ride their motorcycle, don't go out and pound a whole freaking moto on it and beat it up. Go get a couple laps in it, be respectful, but get an opportunity to ride everything you can. If there's a demo day from your KTM and your Husky or whoever, go ride all the bikes if they're not the brands you own.
Right.
Not because you're going to buy the bike, because, hey, I know that's kind of sad. KTM demoing bikes, you may not buy it.
But you may buy the bike if you
You
find
might,
it
if you love it, right?
everything you love. Yeah.
Right. But if you can ride all the colors, you'll learn so much about little nuanced differences. And what's funny is the bikes are more alike than they are different. This is what people need to realize. They have two wheels. They're the same size wheels, right? If you're on a 250F, 450, whatever. They got tires. They got about the same amount of suspension travel. They've got about the same seat height. They've got about the same foot peg height. Like, if you were to actually dyno all the 250s or all the 450s, and the 450s actually now have a bigger disparity, which is we'll get into later, I guess. But the difference is percentages. We're talking sub 10% in any category. If you hop on one, you're like, oh, that bike's trash. I hate it. I can't ride it. But there's some dude out there who probably can beat you on it. You need to understand what's good about that bike. Don't just hop on bikes and say, I like it or don't like it. Like, I have people who say, I cannot ride that motorcycle. His bar bend and his levers are weird. And I'm like, then you're not a very good rider. What are you talking about? I'm a pro. No, you should be totally adaptable to little things like that. And your mind should be focused on the big things that really matter. So how stiff is the suspension? So that's what my first thing is. Like, if you get a bike, you buy it. Your first goal should be put hours on it without dicking with it too much.
Okay.
Got to understand what your bike feels like in multiple conditions: dry, wet, muddy, sandy, hard pack. And you need to know what your bike feels like at the beginning of the day, the end of the day, rough, smooth, all of these things. You need to start cataloging, and probably journaling is your best bet. Like, after every moto, just write down some thoughts you had, because you can't remember it forever, right?
Which, by the way, this is what Bones Bacon is renowned with at PC.
Right.
That guy's a walking almanac. He doesn't like the computer. Everything's in a journal, and he's got a metal cabinet at PC that's 50 of them, and they're probably covered in rust, and Bones can cite every one of them. So if you think you're too cool for journaling, one of the best suspension guys in the history of our sport.
So that's the key, right? It's just ride hours. Like, the very first thing on a new motorcycle you should do is at least get to 10 to 15 hours of ride time. In the faster
on stock suspension,
a bone stock bike.
Okay.
The only times I would have exception to that is if you're grossly overweight or grossly underweight of the target. And I mean grossly, because realistically, and we could go into details about this, but spring rates are not that important. And it's really hard for people to grasp this.
Okay.
Your valving is the primary driver of damping and of motion. Your springs just kind of hold you up. So if you're too heavy for a bike, you're just going to sit a little lower than you should. And yes, that affects the suspension. And if you're too light, you're going to sit a little higher than you should, but it really doesn't affect stiffness. And it's something that people really struggle with. It's like a great analogy I've always used is a trampoline. You can have a 5-year-old to a 50-year-old go jump on a trampoline and they don't change the springs. So your bike is the same way. It's the differences in spring rate are so small that you actually really do make that overall the damping is really the bigger difference there. So unless you're grossly, like I would say, if you're 15 pounds either way from an approximate target, so 250F, you can imagine about 160 pound target, and a 450 about 180 to 185 pound target. So 15 pounds heavier or lighter, you can ride the motorcycle. And I would put in that time. The faster you can get to 10 to 15 hours, the better. So go put in a lot of hours when you buy your bike before you change anything. Because what you'll end up finding is that, when you start changing parts, now you got to relearn and readjust to your bike. That's already a challenge, right? And then number two, you really don't know what your bike needs until you know what it does well and what it does poorly. Well, you can't know what it does well and what it does poorly until you go put it through all paces of different types of riding. So that's number one, just ride the damn thing. Number two is get a journal or a list of things you really like and the things you hate. Now, if you can ride other people's bikes, I really find that to be fundamental, right? Because then you can say, okay, so-and-so did this with theirs. Let me go try that out. Or this other brand, right? So you ride a KTM and you go ride a Yamaha and you say, oh, I really like this about the Yamaha and I really don't like this about the KTM, but I really like this other aspect of the KTM and I don't like this about the Yamaha. Put it in your journal. And then the question becomes, for whoever you work with, how do we bridge the gaps of areas I hate? And you really should never hate a new bike. They're really good motorcycles stock. They're better than they've ever been, and they continue to get better. There's some guy's job is to make that bike better. So you really just have to find things that you just can't live with at all. Or you're like, this is just really bad for me. And then now that you have a list of items, now let's go work on those items. So that's number one, ride your stock motorcycle. Number two, when you ride your stock bike, after a few hours, like obviously I would recommend most people set their sag. So the only reason you couldn't hit sag numbers is if you're 20, 25 pounds either way, right? That's when you couldn't do that. But once you've set sag, you should move it a little bit after, like, let's say 5 hours. Just go set to the manufacturer suggested target, go ride it for 5 hours. And then after that 5 hours, now put in the time of tweaks. But you don't need to send your stuff out to really learn a lot about your bike. So for example, all right, do I like more or less sag? Have you tested it? You don't really even need to measure it. Once you've set it to a setting, mark your little round on your spring, your lock nut or whatever, and then just go one full round looser and one full round tighter and just go see what that feels like. Because your ability to measure sag is probably less replicatable than you need it to be. So more importantly is just, this is the setting it's at now. Let me go try this other setting. Okay, let me come back. Let me try it the other way, A or B. If you can't tell a difference either direction, then you need to double that change, right? You
How
say,
quickly
okay,
how quickly would you put a stopwatch to it? You just going off a feel initially?
initially, it's just balance. What we're trying to chase is which way does the bike feel better in certain ways.
We're back
right?
to what do you
So,
like?
yes, just kind of getting a balance. But you need to put that 5 hours in first, because initially you hop on a new bike and you say, oh, the back feels tall. Well, it might be feel tall with what you're used to. But you can put 5 hours in on something and all of a sudden you're used to it. I mean, how many people do you know? And I have friends, and I was guilty of this. You go tweak your bars just a little bit.
Yep.
You know, you didn't know you tweaked them, and you straighten your front end out, and there are a little tweaked, and you're like, I think they're tweaked. And you go put 5 hours on it, and you don't know they're tweaked. And then you hop on somebody else's bike, and you're like, hey, dude, I think your bars are bent. He said, no, your bars are bent. You're like, oh, your body's totally capable of adjusting.
That's right. Yep.
You got to put in the time to get used to how that manufacturer sold that bike. And people miss this all the time. They've already done all this testing.
Right.
So the way it comes is their idea of what the best is, because they've gone higher and lower on the sag. They've gone up and down in the forks. They've gone stiffer and softer on the suspension. They've done everything. So at the end of the day, they think that that motorcycle you bought is the absolute best middle of the road bike for every condition and every situation you could encounter. And the only way that they think you could make it better would be to sacrifice somewhere else. That's the manufacturer's opinion of the motorcycle. Whether they're right or wrong, it's a whole different discussion. Right?
Sure.
But at the end of the day, that's their thought. And odds are they do know more than you know. And they have put in more testing time than you have on more conditions and more tracks with more riders, with more data than you probably have in any suspension guy or any motor shop or anybody you'll ever work with. And so that's really something you got to be in tune with, is understanding why the bike came the way it came. Once you understand that, so for example, you ride it how it's supposed to come, you went and you say, you know what, I want the rear to be a little lower. That's what I like. I want it to be lower. So you go lower the rear and you try it and you go, well, I love the way it feels lower. Like just sitting on the bike, it feels better to me. But all of a sudden now, the front end lost some grip in some corners. I got a little this, I got, whatever it was that you encountered. And typically that might be it. Or it's starting to get low coming out of the turn. It's starting to feel harsh on some acceleration bumps, whatever. Now you know why it didn't come that way.
Right.
At least you know what the positive and negative was of your change. Now, some changes, you just be like, that's just great for me. Good. Now you know. The same applies to fork height. I mean, I can take a guy to the track, do sag, fork height, and clickers, and they'll be like, it's a totally different motorcycle. And it's true. It is a totally different motorcycle. So, for example, go buy triple clamps of a different offset. You hear this all the time. Oh, we bought this, I bought that, whatever. Well, you almost get the exact same thing by moving your forks up or down. I mean, it's almost identical. There's a little bit of difference there, but what it does to the overall geometry, weight balance, and all that is really similar. So before you go buy clamps, have you moved your forks up and down? Do you know which direction you want? And I'll give you an example. The new Hondas, in the previous gen Honda, most people, most aftermarket, most factories were running a longer offset, a bigger offset.
Okay.
Most people don't know what offset is. Most people think, okay, here's my angle of my forks, right? Here's my front forks. People think offset is this, steeper or shallower. It's not. Offset is, okay, here is the angle of my forks, and I have my steering stem right here. That's where your stem's at. If I change my offset, I change not the angle. I'm struggling with this on camera. I'm changing how far or close my fork is to the steering tube.
But the angle of your arm stays the same.
Stays the same.
You're just moving it out or in.
Correct. Okay. So you're not actually, like, because magazines...
You're not changing the rake of the front wheel.
The rake is something else.
Okay.
It does change the same thing as rake as far as what it does to the tire. This is what people don't grasp, but it does it in a different way.
Okay.
So if you change your fork height by in or out, you change almost the same thing that offset does.
Okay.
You do change the front end a little bit level a little bit, but at the end of the day, if you think about it, if I infinitely stick my fork out farther and I have the same length fork, technically my front end still drops. So because you have an angle there, right? So it's they do almost the same thing. So before you buy a triple clamp, you should at least move your forks up and down.
That
And then, like,
makes
for
sense.
example, Hondas, they were, what the hot topic had been on Hondas is to extend it out, which is opposite of what a lot of triple clamp companies have done over the years. Because the thought was that the front tire was too much weight on it, there's too much front weight bias, and there's a feeling of front end heaviness. So if you space the fork farther out and the front wheel farther out, A, you get more stability because you get more wheelbase, fairly true. And two, you change some weight balance around. But how you get to that conclusion is, man, I'm consistently running my Honda with the forks all the way down in the fork. And that's the best setting for me. I'm running the bike as tall as it can be. The forks are dropped as far as they can be down, and I just can't go any further. And I would like to go further because I really like where I'm at. I'd like to go further. That's where the triple clamp starts to make a tremendous amount of sense. Or, like we talked about off record, about your stock clamps have so much R&D behind them as far as the stiffness and the thicknesses and how they're manufactured and the durability of them. I mean, it's more than people would ever understand. That would be a full-time project for a 4-year degreed engineer for probably 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
Easily. That's how much time's in that. Now, luckily, the manufacturers have done that and they have all that work. So it's pretty much, okay, cut and paste, right? Like, we know what we're doing. But for example, Ken Roxon's bike, for the most part, this last year, and this isn't a feature, they ran stock triple clamps on the stock, on the RMZ. Why? Well, through a lot of testing that team did, it happened to give him the feel that he's looking for.
And doesn't he like to be real front wheel tacky?
Yeah, and I think from what I heard, Roxon is very, I mean, everybody's heard this, but he is very sensitive to harshness.
Yes.
And to feel, but he also, believe it or not, runs still stiffer than average Joe's suspension. I mean, way stiffer. So he's real picky about that. And so because of that, all these items contribute to that. You'd be shocked. I mean,
I was going to say the domino effect's got to be crazy.
So I have a client, for example, one of the hot things you could do on KTMs, and this is a nice little secret we had a few years ago, was if you put the old gas cast clamps on a KTM, back in like 22 year or previous, they, like, the front end felt like literally 20 clicks or 30 clicks softer.
Wow.
It didn't actually, the suspension didn't function softer, but your overall harshness feeling just dramatically dropped.
Just because of the cap. Okay.
The clamps, yeah, the clamps, the same offset.
Gotcha.
Something about that gas clamp was way plusher. And if you had that in your little back pocket, people bitching on a KTM about harshness all the time, didn't matter where they sent their suspension. It's like, hey, go find some probably widely available takeoff clamps, because people throw clamps on those bikes because it's a cheap item on a gas, and you could get them free and you will be blown away. So if you're an off-road woods rider, you ride a KTM or Husqvarna and you're on those youre models, there you guys go. Go buy those stock gas clamps and you will not believe the difference in plush feeling. I don't know the answer to that. I could never tell you. That is well beyond, like, that would take, like I said, multiple years of study to truly understand that.
Well, the millions of R&D and the hours of the equipment. It's
manufacturing process, how different materials of aluminum, but of different varieties and castings and forgings and how they all apply. I don't know those answers, right? I couldn't possibly tell you. I can tell you this: you change a connecting rod in an engine from one material to another and it changes in sound. That blows my mind. It shouldn't.
Yes.
It should not change.
Right.
I mean, it's funny, on my desk has got some of my projects. My other projects are my other desk. But speaking of that, so like, here's rods we're developing. These have been rapid prototyped and we're working on our own rods, and we have our own tie rods and all that stuff. These are not tie, but we've got a couple here, and here's like a standard KTM rod. And so long and short, you change material around and you're like, well, that bike sounds different. Only change. So there's something there, right? Well, there's something there in the clamp. So that's number one. Ride your damn bike. Don't buy any shit for it, which is hard for half you vet guys. Not to just not buy shit to ride your bike. I get it. Hey, 10 hours for some of these guys I know who are like friends of ours, dude, that might be a half a year of riding for them to work. So that's a scenario where, hey, you want to bling your bike out, go support the industry, go spend your pocketbook. I don't care. That's cool. But if you're trying to win races, you need to put time in to understand your bike, number one. And then number two, once you really have a good feel of what you don't like, okay, I've moved my forks up, I've moved my forks down, I've moved my sag up, I've moved my sag down, I've turned my clickers all the way in, I turned my clickers all the way out, I played with the rebound. You've done all of these things. And think how many settings are there.
Exponential combinations are out of this world.
Just
Because
those things.
if you have three of them, that's 27. Three to the
Yeah.
third power is 27 combinations, and you've gone 6 in, 6 out, up, down.
It is endless.
Where do you start? Yeah.
Right. Okay. So at the end of the day, like there's so much you can test on your stock motorcycle, you would be blind blown, right? It just would completely shock you. And you might find that without spending a lot of money, your bike can be incredibly good for you with just some little tweaks like that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people make their bike worse by sending parts out. And we're probably guilty of it too, right? I had an email the other day with a client who, thank you for your business. Huge thanks, right? They found us on the internet, never met them before, all that kind of deal.
Yep.
They wanted our national stage 3 KTM 85 package. Well, 90% of those clients are people chasing Lorettas.
Yeah.
Right. That's what that package is geared for. It's not geared for little Johnny at your local track. Now, granted, I'm a business. I will sell little Johnny that motor at your local track if you really want it. And little Johnny at some local tracks does need it. They just don't chase nationals. So I'm not saying that either way, right? Well, anyway, we send it out. And the first email I got back was, hey, he thinks that the bottom end's not as good as stock. And I'm like, well, that's kind of true. But he does, there should be a definite difference in power, when you're in the power.
Certainly.
And then I asked a couple more questions, and it comes out that basically little Johnny is not a national level racer and probably doesn't need that motor. So, okay, well, we can try a couple things. Let me, change the pipe combination around and move the cylinder around, and we can do that. But luckily I said, hey, okay, great. Tell me what you need. And luckily she's like, well, do you think he just needs to ride it a little bit harder? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, get into the power. Like once you get into the power, I think you'll find that it's considerably better. Sure enough, like literally the same day, sending an email back. Oh, kid says it absolutely hauls ass. He just had to hit the gas more. Oh, okay, good to know. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, probably not the client who needed that motor right out of the gate, right? They could have gone with a considerably less package. But for that rider, you maybe made the bike worse until they get better because it's going to be a lot more power than they need. And right, if you're really lugging that bike, like sub power valve, like when the power valve's down, it's not on the pipe and you're kind of what I would call woods riding it, but people ride that in moto.
Yep.
That bike is going to be a handful for you because when it comes on the pipe, so then your kid's afraid of getting it on the pipe, right? Because they're like, oh man, the thing's too fast. So that's where it's easy to make your bike worse. Same with suspension. I mean, if your first impression of a bike is, I think the suspension's harsh, take it off 1 hour in, you send it out to so-and-so company, right?
Yep.
Well, was it harsh? We talked about this on previous podcasts. Or was it, are you a fast rider? Maybe harshness is too soft. But all you said is, fuck, it's stiff, it's harsh, I hate it. You call up that company, hey, you got a solution for me? And they're like, yeah, of course.
Elaborate on that for anybody who didn't hear that episode. So the conversation stemmed from, you get a lot of guys calling you saying it's too soft. And explain why they think it's too soft.
Or too stiff, right? Yep. So,
too stiff.
Right. So again, another YouTube feature we need to do, but we've kind of got, if you want to see the internals of suspension, go check my channel. I've got WP, Showa, and KYB, the current stuff. You can go look at the insides, and I dare you, go watch those videos and then come back and tell me how your suspension knows where it is. So number one, your suspension does not know where it is. Now there's some little factors that say that it does, there's some little things, but ultimately the primary drivers of force do not know where they are, and that's your damping. So a lot of times if you get deep into the stroke, and the magazines say this, but they say it really poorly and really incorrectly in my opinion, because they don't know. They're not suspension guys, right?
Yep.
If you're not past halfway down all the time, you're too stiff, right? Like you should use all your travel in almost every landing. That's just how suspension is going to be. And you should just not bottom harshly, but you should use most of your travel. But if you're past halfway of your suspension in braking bumps, getting into the last half, and more importantly, the last third of your travel, there are pieces in there that ramp it up dramatically. And so what there's an air spring. So anybody who has a spring fork and says, oh, I hate air forks, guess what? You have an air fork. You just don't know it. So you have this air spring, and air springs are an X squared chart. They ramp up. So as you get to the end, they get really, 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 really stiff. And that's great. You don't over jump a big ass jump to flat, right? You're in supercross or you're outdoors or you slam a whoop. We need that. We need that safety margin at the end of the stroke. So if you're constantly in braking bumps, getting into this last third of travel, now your fork's really harsh and stiff because it's way stiffer at that last bit. And number two, Also, our balance of the bike's going to be way off, meaning we're looking like this going through the bumps. And so it can't get the shock to work, right? And now that the shock's essentially acting too stiff because all the weight bias is on the front, now the forks are acting even softer than they are. And this is when we talk about balance. So if you're like, hey, my forks are really harsh. Okay, let me ask you these questions.
Yep.
Question number one, when are they harsh? If you don't know the answer to that, don't even call a suspension company. You have to know this. And this is setting up your bike.
Yep.
Are they harsh when you hit the very first little tiny braking bump that's 3 inches? Oh, no, I can't feel those. Okay, that's sign number one that your suspension's actually too soft. Sign number two, whenever I jump a jump, man, if I just barely go long or I barely go short and I hit hard, it just kills me. Okay, you're probably too soft. Number three, when I go through successive braking bumps, so there's a whole section of 10 of them or 12 of them, late in the braking bump section, I start to get kicked, starts to get harsh. Okay, bump, it goes bump, 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 bam, right? That hurts.
Yep.
That can be a rebound issue, although if you haven't really messed with your bike, it's not. I can just guarantee you it's not. So if it's stock, your rebound's plenty fast for the most part. So at the end of the day, if you're encountering that, you're probably soft. Or I hit a really big braking bump, harsh, but it's good on all the other stuff. I just cannot charge my motorcycle. The harder I charge, the worse it gets. Okay, you're probably too soft. And you're probably too soft specifically in the forks. Because as the forks become too soft, then the shock gets way out of whack. It's just not going to work good. Again, you're not forcing the shock to go down. Nothing forces the shock to move. You know, like if your shock's going to come up to the rear tire,
Yep.
there's no force on the top side of it. It's not going to be able to move up. It's going to push your bike.
Yep.
You have to have, that's why we put our weight back in the bumps, to take load off the forks and to add load to the rear of the bike. That should just be obvious. We just do it naturally, but a lot of people don't think about it.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's a sign, right? But nowadays, most production bikes come, and this wasn't the case 20 years ago by any stretch. And it was in the 90s is totally opposite. The 90s bikes just came too soft. If you could ride motocross and you were a C-level racer, your bike was too soft. Guarantee it. Nowadays, the bikes come really good. And I mean, like a stock Yamaha, in my opinion, or a stock KTM, it comes at like local pro level, non-Loretta's Pro. And a Loretta's Pro could ride it, no problem. But I mean, it comes at that level. It comes at like a national front of the C pack / middle of the B pack level. That's how your bike comes. So most of the time, you're not going to be too soft most of the time. But if you're, but that's what you're looking for. So that's a key. And on the flip side, am I too stiff? Well, first indicator there is really easy to tell, because when you're too soft, you go, man, my clicker's softer and it doesn't feel any better. That's also a sign. Right? It didn't make any improvement in my motorcycle. Okay, something's going on here. Maybe this is like typical. It's hard for your brain to judge. Go all the way stiff with it, and it got better. Oh, now we're starting to see the story on being too soft, right? But clickers are, the reason revalves exist, and this is so hard for people to understand, they believe their clicker should be 12-12 or middle or 9-8 or whatever. There's a number they're shooting for in their head.
Yep.
The only reason revalves exist is because clicks are not a big enough change. So if you're afraid to turn your clickers all the way in or all the way out, there's a problem with you. Right? If your bike works best with the clickers all the way out, then you should ride it with the clickers all the way out. Now that might be telling you, hey, I maybe need a revalve because the clicks are not enough. So that's what valving does. Valving says, hey, clicks ain't going to get me there, because really clicks are like focusing in on this area here, like a small amount of change.
Okay.
But a revalve can do this. The problem with the revalve is it can do this. So your clicks are here and you're just at the end of, you're on this side. Okay, I'm right here and I need to go right, here.
Just beyond it, yeah.
Right, well, the revalve can do this. So if the revalve shop misses it and you're over here or you're over here, then you're going to hate it. So the goal for the revalve shop is to hear which way you're off and then move the slider to where now your click range, which is here, is moved into the range that you need it to function at.
In that last 1 to 2%. Okay.
Right. If this is soft and you're an enduro rider, right, then you need to be here. If this is a C-class rider, then you need to be here. If this is a B-class rider, you need to be here. If this is a local pro, you need to be here. If this is a outdoor national pro, they need to be here. And this is true. This is relatively accurate. If you're a supercross pro, you need to be here.
And if it's on the other side, you've already missed
your clicks, you just can't get you there.
Can't get to it.
But there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I know I can't get there, but I really like the setting all the way soft compared to all the way stiff. Or, it's not hurting anything.
Right. It goes back to what you said, number one, know what you want.
Right.
And then go after what you're searching for. Regardless of what they say the numbers are supposed to be, you've got to know what I always go back to, what is it that you're searching for?
Right. But if you're right middle of the road rider, right? So for example, if you are the target audience for that bike, so let's say that the revalve setting stock is right here. Okay.
Hmm.
That's where they came out of the factory. And you happen to be a rider that sits right here, a revalve's not going to be a game changer for you.
Sure.
This is where you need to go ride your bike. Like I said, turn your clicks in, turn your clicks out, move your forks up, move your forks down, move your sag up, move your sag down, because
Completely stock.
completely stock.
Completely stock.
Because the manufacturer is really, really smart. Yamaha, KTM, Husqvarna, Gas, Honda, Cowie, at selecting really where this range is. As an aftermarket shop, we can do this. I may not know what your range is,
Sure.
even though I ask a million questions. So, and any shop doesn't. It's like, I'll put it in bluntly, like Factory Connection, in my opinion, they say, okay, the manufacturer picked here, and it's our opinion that they really should have picked here. So we're going to send out every single setup in motocross for this. And if they're right about their evaluation, then you will love your suspension.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not the company that's going to listen to you and be like, and I'm not talking down on them, but if you're average Joe Blow consumer, this is basically what you get. They're not the company that's going to say, I listened to you on the phone and we thought you were here, but the reality is you're way over here or you're way over here. They're not that company, because they lose money if they're off on those one-offs versus being right for the vast majority of their clients. Right.
Well, and it also goes back to what you said earlier too. People are calling wanting to get knowledge for free, and companies need to make money, and they can't afford to be walking you through this type of reverse engineering to figure out where is your range. And that to me speaks volumes on exactly what you're talking about. Understand what you're evaluating. Riding the bike stock is starting with creating a baseline. If you don't like it, it could just simply because you're just on the other side of
just barely,
the ideal range.
You're on the fence. It's just on the other side. And you got to establish. It goes back to
your journaling, checks and balances, checks and balances, checks and balances. Find where that range is.
Yep. Where is it better? Where is it worse?
If you now your journaling makes more sense to me, because now you're trying to see if you can get into that established range that's produced by or mass produced by the manufacturer. You're trying to make sure that you're in that ideal range as it's been put out. If not, that's when you
modify your bike. Right. Yep. And then we can get into motor next, but like, that's what it's about. And then number two is come to your suspension company with data. Mm-hmm. If you call me up and have done this and you're very detailed and you're like, look, Derek, I have found that I like my forks all the way stiff. I like my shock all the way soft, and I've tried it every which way. And I like the forks pushed all the way down. Every change you've made is consistent. Mm-hmm. Getting weight off the front end, onto the rear end, and you're maxed out, then it's like, wow, you put in your time. Now, some people just like bikes like that, which is that's an RC setup, right? He just loves his bike like that. But that's where you say, or for example, hey, Derek, I just have all my clicks all the way out. And I've tested every which way. Both sides are all the way out. I just can't get it soft enough. Now, we'll ask all those questions. Do you jump a lot? Are you a pro? Are you fast? Because if that's the case, I'm probably going to tell you you're wrong. But most of the time, those guys are like, oh, no, I ride off-road. I barely ride moto. I go to the moto track once a month. It's really just a little, but I buy a moto bike for whatever reason, right? Oh, okay, right? But if you think that, I'm going to go buy these coated fork tubes with black lowers or purple lowers and a Kashima coated top and a coated shock shaft, and I got the, for example, A-kit shock from whoever, and it's just going to dramatically alter my bike. Well, guess what? The A-kit settings are not any different.
But it goes back to what you said. You don't know where your window is at. So you're just buying something off the shelf, hoping it's going to fit like a glove.
Right.
But you don't even know what you're trying.
Right. So if you don't know,
have an established range.
That window that they selected for the A-kit suits you. Well, guess what? It may or may not.
That makes so much sense.
That's something that people need to grasp. And if you really grasp this, and if you're a smart dad or a smart rider or a smart pro or a smart kid, you'll be successful no matter where you go, no matter who you ride for, no matter what bike you ride, because you understand the concepts involved. And a lot of elite pros, Andrew Short was on our show. Andrew Short knows intimately how his suspension works. He literally is hands-on valve shimming, parts and pieces. When he was testing, he had his hands in on that. That's actually where Ricky Gilmore got his teeth cut in, which is Tomac's suspension guy today.
Okay.
He cut his teeth with Andrew Short here in Texas. I saw them at Red Rock MX in the back of a little tiny box trailer, revalving between motos when he was on Chaparral Honda. And they were revalving and revalving and revalving, and Short's going in there, and they're coming out having discussions on like, yeah, this setting was better here, but worse there. And I really liked this previously. And they were really detailed. And he'd go ride for 30 minutes, come in, make a change, go ride for 30 minutes. And basically at the end of the day, they had all their notes. They compared their notes. And I wouldn't even know Andrew at the time. Right. But it
Sure.
was at the track. And of course, I'm always listening because I'm like, what's going on over there?
Yeah, you're an
So,
engineer. Yep.
yeah. And so he's basically at the end of the day, I still remember to this day, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of, man, if we go with setting, I'm making up a number here, but setting
Sure.
A of blah, 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 combined with setting D that we did blah, 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 that's going to be awesome. And at the time, I didn't know Ricky, and I didn't know it was Ricky Gilmore at the time. He goes, I'll think about it tonight. We'll put something together and we'll try it tomorrow. And essentially what Andrew was asking is the nuances of suspension, which is to say, dude, we're in the window, but one setting is on this side and one setting's on this side, and I want something in the middle. How do we get there?
And
so
how
he
many years
goes-
ago was that?
This is back to the Chaparral Honda days, so probably 10-ish, 10-ish years ago, probably more. I have to look up when he won his Supercross. Whenever the Chaparral Honda days were for a shorty. So the McGrath
Because I
team
just
and all
think
that.
it goes back to what we said earlier. We on this show have talked about the idea that kids need to learn to communicate.
Yep.
You know, when they think typing out the words okay on a text is too much work, all you get's a K, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I see lacking is nobody communicates. Nobody knows what they want. Everybody complains and does the blame game. You saw something over 10 years ago, and we're seeing it manifest now. That 10 years ago, what was Tomac riding the R&D Suzuki? I think maybe at the time.
No, he would have been pro at the time. Actually, he would have been
10 years ago.
250s. Yeah, and actually,
he's
this
Geico.
Gilmore guy worked with Tomac at that same team around that time. Not the same team, but around the same time frame. I
Yep.
think he went from Shorty moved on to KTM, and I think Gilmore went to Geico, if I remember
So
right. And I
here we
don't
are
know,
looking at
maybe
10 years
Geico-
later.
Yeah,
He's
And now here
following
we are.
Tomac at Yamaha.
right.
There
And
you
that's
go.
because he clearly is smart. He established a relationship with Tomac. He listened. He's a
Studied.
good tuner, right? He's a good tuner.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, your job as I had a kid. He passed away, RIP. His name is Jimmy Taylor. Right when I started my business, it was when I first fast kids. And so, like young kids. And so we worked really back then. I mean, I was new, right? So I was putting in hours and hours and hours to him specifically. And so we'd go to the tracks every weekend and test every weekend. He had like 4 or 5, or probably had 1085s in reality, the damn junkyard of Yamahas at the time. And so we would test. And he was smart, beyond like smart kid, not educated smart, but smart. And then mature. At age 12, he acted like he was 18.
Nice.
And that's that, basically his dad didn't have a ton of money, would drop him off with local pros when he was 7. And they would just go take him to tracks and stuff when he was like a 7-year-old. So he kind of acted way beyond his age.
Sure.
But he got so knowledgeable about suspension because we're testing, and I was honest with him. This is what we're doing today. This is what we're doing today. I'm not like, yeah, it's going to be better. It's going to be so much plusher. It's going to have better bottom resistance. It's going to be everything, bro. We don't sell that way. So he really intimately got to understand his suspension. And then he had I don't remember how many years we worked with him. We worked with him for quite a long time. But over the course of let's say 2 years on the 85, we got him to a point where he could go adjust his own bike on his own time without any input from me and know what made it better.
Nice.
And so I'll never forget, he was out training with some other kid who was a little bit faster than him, like a Cowie kid with a ton of money who just basically bought everything, right? Go buy, at the time, Pro Circuit Kawasaki 85s. And
Yep.
the kid was struggling with something on suspension, and Jimmy, hey, what are you struggling with? Oh, dude, you need to speed up your rebound. And the kid's like, no, I'm getting kicked in the bumps. I've been slowing it down. He's like, no, dude, you need to speed up your rebound. What are you talking about, man? It's bucking me. Well, we had gone through this process with Jimmy. We had A, tested it, but B, told him the science, and C, showed him on his camera.
Sure.
So he knew that you don't get kicked by your rebound. Sorry, guys. It's not how it works. Go stand on your bike in your garage. As hard as you want, that rear tire will not come off the ground. The rebound damps that out, number one. But number two, the bike weighs so much, the wheel weighs so little, right, that you don't have the opposite of the force's ability. Meaning that when the spring is pushing it out, your bike's just too damn heavy versus the wheel
to
make
get it up.
over. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another discussion about spring rates. There's just not enough spring in your bike to make it happen. So he knew that. So he told the kid, no. Go back it out. And so they go over there and they backs it out, problem solved, right? And the kid's like, how'd you know that? He's like, oh, because I work with Derek. And the kid, he had talked to us a few times. The dad had talked to us, but we were just little Joe Blow podunk shop, that we didn't know what we're talking about.
Yep.
And here he is with Pro Circuit, and they got the best of the best of the best. And they had they had everything. Granted, Pro Circuit's good too. The kid was making it worse.
Sure.
Right? So, just by changing the clicks there, it solved their problem, where the kid had just been continually making it worse. So it's something you have to understand is understand your damn bike. So that's number one. Number two, on that topic, one click either way. Doesn't matter. Oh, I want to click. It's horrible. No, dude, you're horrible. And I don't mean that negatively. You cannot tell. If I double blind tested every test rider in the industry, with maybe one or two exceptions, they could not tell one click. I promise it. So if you can, you'd be like, there's, it's a little bit. And that's what clicks are for. They're to be super precise tuning changes, right? They're not to be revalves. Because, for example, Honda as a company says, man, because there's ways you could make adjusters do way too much. You could definitely do it. Think about the liability if a guy could go and turn his click one way or the other way and make it go from full enduro cross setting to full supercross setting. And then some guy gets hurt.
Sure.
And then they get sued, right? They don't want that. So at the end of the day, the clickers are very limited in scope. And then how they function limits how they scope. They're a needle in a hole. So there's a needle on your screw. There's a hole that it goes into and it's tapered. And so it goes in or out. More or less fluid can come in or out of that hole. That's all it does. But it's a tiny little hole and a tiny little needle. And then if you actually look at your valving, it's a huge piston with big holes.
Sure.
Lots of shims. So those are really the big difference. But the clickers fine tune that. So that's clicks. Chassis wise, like I said, forks up, forks down, sag up, sag down, and every combination in between. Wheel forward, wheel back. Like some of the bikes now have the ability that you can change 2 links with a chain. Like they have enough room in the adjustment. So you may want to try that. You may want to try wheel all the way back. You may want to try wheel all the way forward. And I'll tell you right now, if you're riding indoors, arena crossy, fair races, some of these people who do that, you probably should be shortening your motorcycle way up.
Absolutely. It's not going to turn otherwise.
No. So let's make that wheelbase short. Let's pull those forks way up in the clamps, which technically, if you put a tape measure down at the wheels after you've done that, you're shortening your wheelbase. Now your bike turns good, yada, 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 yada. Well, guess what? You're in indoor arena cross racing, you're second gear.
Yeah. There's no high-speed stability. Yeah, no issue. Yep.
Now we flip that around. We go the other way. We go to really, really, really fast tracks. Maybe that wheelbase needs to get extended. We go to shorter, tighter tracks. And people who think that there's just one setting that's perfection everywhere, it just doesn't work that way.
Well, and the other thing too is when you shorten the wheelbase, let's say you leave the forks where they're at. You decide that you want a little more bottom end snap out of a corner. So you add a tooth to the rear. You now move the rear wheel in the swing arm. Forget to tell little Johnny. He puts his bum in the same spot and wonders why he's loop out Larry on the start. He's got a shorter wheelbase. It's going to accelerate quicker, and he didn't move forward at all. So the thing just comes straight up. He double clutches it and or loops out. Same thing coming out of a corner. And then the dad's raising holy heck because little Johnny's not shifting the bike. Well, nobody told little Johnny that we added a tooth. You're going to be Mr. Shifter. You're going to be shifting all over the place.
You have to.
Because it's going to run out of speed quicker. But it accelerates like a beast.
Yeah.
So
and you've got to test this, right? So then you said about sprockets. So let's move on. Like, let's say that's chassis. That's chassis basics. And if you're not doing that today, why are you sending your suspension out? Well, I don't know.
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing. Figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what else to tell you other than try it out. If you can't ride your bike because you think the settings are that far off by moving your forks 2 mils either way, you should quit. I really mean this. I mean, like I said about the handlebars thing, I can't ride so-and-so's bike. He's got a 2 millimeter different bar bend than I have. Bro, just quit riding your bikes. And I don't mean that to be mean. If you're that sensitive to your bars, like, yes, it feels different. I get it feels different because that's what you feel immediately is bars, levers, forward, back. I get that. But that's not, if that's more important to you than the actual chassis changes, then why are you bitching about your suspension? Go buy 20 different sets of bars and 20 different sets of levers and find what you like there, right? Like,
with the one caveat that you said earlier, unless you're outside of that 15-pound deviation, that 95% of what they sold it for, if you're outside of that, sure, you might be able to say that
at minimum, go get your springs done.
Exactly. Goes back to what you said earlier.
Done. And the analogy I use for people here, and I think it's a good one over the years, I've tried to get a better analogy, but this is the one I use.
Yeah.
And anybody who's driven various trucks would totally, have felt this. If you own an F-150 and you don't put anything in the bed of the truck and you go driving around, nowadays, they drive pretty good, right? And if you go load that bed down to like max braided for that truck with dirt, it rides like dog shit.
Yep.
Right? That truck is a medium duty truck. It's not a, it's like what we call light duty, but it's a 1500. It can be a truck and it can do truck things, but it's also meant to be able to drive around without doing truck things. So a lot of people will say, yeah, my truck rides so much better with 1 or 2 dirt bikes in it. Yep, because it's designed to have a little bit of a load, but it rides so much worse when it's at max load. Well, that's the example of a truck that's slightly oversprung. So if you buy a bike, you're slightly too weight, you add a little weight to it, it works a little bit better. But if you go buy an F-250 and you don't put anything in the bed and you're trying to drive it around, it's rough roads and bumps, speed bumps. If you're trying to run it around, you're like, God, this thing's so harsh. It's horrible. This truck rides like shit. I need a 1500. Well, if you're driving the truck as a form of travel and not work, yes, you probably should have bought a 1500, right?
Yep.
But you go throw a ton of weight in that bed. You go put some work tools and a tool chest and put 500, 600, 700 pounds of weight back there. And all of a sudden the truck starts to ride pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing applies to F350. It's even to the next level. It's got heavy springs, and I don't know how true that is or not with F350, but a dually, right?
But to your point, you want to throw a fifth wheel on the back, and it does it perfectly.
It does its job because that's its job. So your dirt bike's the same way. If you're grossly undersprung or oversprung, just go change your springs before you do anything. That will help you tremendously. If you own a KTM with air forks, go buy a rear shock spring, right? So like say you're 20 pounds or 25 pounds under intended weight. You're probably at minimum 1, but maybe 2 spring rate steps. Go buy that. It's $100, $150. Put it on. Probably sell your other spring, right? And then you got air forks. Go set your air pressure in the manual. Go look it up and say, okay, intended target 155 PSI. I'm going to be 135. That's what the manual says. And then just ride it. Then do everything we talked about. That's key. Now, if you have a bike with spring forks, okay, now you got to have springs front and rear. And a lot of people are like, well, if I'm going to do that, I just want to get it set up. How many times do you think that shop, and I see this all the time, I'm not going to name names, and I'm not throwing shade because the shops are not wrong.
Yep.
Oh, I sent it out to so-and-so, and I spent $1,500. I love it. They change your springs, didn't hardly change your valving at all because you didn't need it. You were right in the range of where you're supposed to be, and they knew that. So they did the right thing for you. They said, hey, you're in this range. You just need a spring change. And if we change this range, your bike's going to get worse for you. So we're going to leave it. Now, what they really sold you was confidence.
Absolutely.
And it's hard for people to grasp this. And so people think that there's some magic A-kit suspension that does all of this. Oh, if I buy this suspension, it does this range. No, it does not. And we can prove this conclusively. If you ever get honest answers, which is hard to get out of suspension shops, they'll tell you that's the truth because most A-kit suspension runs the same guts and pieces internals as stock suspension.
Interesting.
They have the same concepts in valving. They have the same amount of travel. They use similar fluids, right? Like same fluids essentially. And at the end of the day, the only big difference you might get is, oh, wow, they got black coatings and Kashima coatings, or they got rainbow coatings and Kashima coatings. And there's an argument to be made that there's advantages there. But I can equally make the argument that there are none there. And we could show that very well through data. So at the end of the day, people, well, then why do they sell coatings? Well, because it looks cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of looking cool, let's say you're factory Yamaha. What are you really doing as factory Yamaha? Number one, or factory KTM, or factory Honda. You're recruiting.
Yep.
You've got your guy now, and you want to have the next guy. And so these factory teams are doing every little thing they can do. Imagine if you're a factory Honda, and Yamaha comes out with rainbow-coated fork tubes, and you don't have it.
Yep.
So you have to keep up with the Joneses. So is there actual meaning to DLC being a little bit slicker and a little bit less friction and a cool coating? Hell yes. It's a badass coating, and in the right application, it has very specifically needed uses, actually.
But you're back to that you're into that top 1% of the 1% that are going to reap the benefits of that technology. Dissipate heat,
make your
right?
suspension a little bit slicker.
Okay.
Okay, in theory.
Yep.
Right? Okay, turn your clicks out 3 clicks.
Just makes it smoother all the way through.
Well, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but it's friction. We don't want friction. Yeah, but functionally, what are we doing? We're functionally making our suspension a little bit softer. That's literally functionally, because your hands don't care where the force comes from.
Right.
You have a spring that provides force, you have valving that provides force, and you have friction that provides force. They all three total up to the total force that you're talking about. And then we have an air spring that provides force, and then there's some oil locks and some other stuff. So long and short, if I have a little bit of frictional force and I remove it, now my fork is just softer. That's all it is.
Does any of the material dissipate heat, or is that irrelevant?
None of the stuff used in coatings. Yeah, it's all the same stuff. You just take the exact stock tubes and you coat them. Yeah. Okay. And here's another example of an argument to, is it really necessary? KTM does not run black or rainbow fork tubes on any factory bike, and they have not for a while.
Mm-hmm.
They run chrome coated tubes just like stock manufacturers do. If all they had to do to make Chase Sexton happy this year was put a rainbow fork coating on his tubes, you don't think they would do it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying don't go buy a kit. I'm not saying don't go buy parts. I'm not saying that there's no reason for the industry in whole. Like we're huge believers in technology, but understand what you're buying and what you're not. And so that's it.
Well, and it also goes back to what you said, even from the very beginning. you don't even know what you want. You don't even know what you're chasing. You don't know if you're in or outside of the way it comes. So you move enough targets, you'll never hit them.
No,
I mean, that's the
and the
name of the
shitty part is
game.
you get a guy who goes builds the most badass, beautiful bike you've ever seen. It's got $30,000 of parts and accessories and a kit and motor and whatever. And A, you can't use it. That's half the guys. Great. I loved it. Dude, call me up. I'll sell you whatever you want. We love
Yep.
that customer. Don't get me wrong. Because now that I'm older and I haven't rode him really forever, I've been hurt, right? I haven't like raced in forever, tracked in forever. I own 2 motorcycles here at the shop for R&D purposes. And guess what? I've got all sorts of bling sitting around for him. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's cool. Like, I think it's the coolest thing ever. Like, I have the hope of riding, right? So, I mean, I think this is the coolest shit ever. You can't tell me that that's
That
not cool.
looks so tough. Yep.
The
Exactly.
HP logo and the rim and like, that's super sick, right?
Yep.
I think that's sick, right? Bling, bling,
Absolutely.
wheel. It's
Yep.
super cool. I'm guilty of it too.
Yep.
But I'd be willing to bet money that that wheel probably doesn't work as good as stock in some way because it's not stock. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
stiffer, and that could be totally the case. It might be better for supercross. It's a really nice wheel, by the way, but it might be better for supercross or for a pro, but it could be worse for a beginner. You know, because the spokes are stiffer and this rim
But
is
see, you
stiffer.
just hit the nail on the head though. If it's spec for a pro, it's to take the bigger G outs and all that goes with it. But like anything in the law of physics, you give to get, you get to
100%.
give.
Right.
And it like you said, you drop those forks, you get high speed stability. You raise those forks up, you lose high speed stability. But now you can turn. It's just the way it goes. And I
And
think
the
that's the
pros are
most
looking
important.
for the pros are basically telling engineers, yep, I want it to turn like the forks are up, but I want it to be stable like the forks are out. And that's why the pros are chasing, and that's why they have engineers and staff, and right.
Yeah,
So they're doing what is like, okay, they're basically saying, I want my bike to do all of this.
exactly.
And it's really hard to do that. That's why pros have the heart, you know, the elite pros. And that's why you hear them so critical of the bike, because essentially they're chasing every avenue they can for performance, and they're asking things that are just outside the realm of physics. And it's the team's job to A, work on that, but B, sell the guy on the setting that he has is the right setting and that it is doing this. So it might actually be doing this. Yeah. Right. And if you really look at confidence and how the world works, and I watched a football game last night. I watched the Sunday night game, Chargers, Bengals. Chargers were triumphant last night, and their new coach Harbaugh. Basically, you go watch his press from over the years, and he's just like so complimentary of his players. He's so complimentary of his quarterback. He's the type of coach that I don't know personally, but you can clearly see outwardly is constantly building them up. Man, we're
Mm-hmm.
just so proud of our guys. Our quarterback's so good. Well, these pro teams are doing the same thing. Your bike is good. Yeah, we went and made these little tweaks in there. Whether or not they did anything, they're trying to sell this guy that, yes, your bike can do it. Your bike can do it. Because if that guy believes, that's all that matters in pro racing. If he
Yep.
believes in his motorcycle, he'll make it work. Because ultimately, the rider is in charge of the bike. And that's how it works.
Well, and I don't know if you've heard this, but I've heard from several good sources that Hayden Deegan is very big on he knows this, he knows what range he wants, and when the bike's in it, he never complains about it. He knows it's never going to be perfect everywhere, whether
Yep.
that's coming from Brian or I'm still a big believer that Brian Deegan's done an incredible job getting Hayden to communicate. Obviously, Brian's got an eye for it. He grew up, not everybody's got a pro dad. I totally respect that. But that idea that Hayden doesn't complain a lot, and I've heard that from several people that work with him on a daily
Because his
basis.
dad probably didn't get bullshitted when it came up. So he didn't buy into the bullshit. They went and said, what can we do? Here's the facts. This is how much power you're making. Here's how much it was stock. Here's your suspension. Here's what it was stock, and let's work on it.
But
That
it goes
is what
back
it
to what you
takes.
said. If Brian walks up and says, here's we'll call
Yep.
this the parameter, right?
Yep.
That's what you started today's illustration with. This is the range the bikes are manufactured at to appease to 91% of the population. There's the bell curve. Okay. Well, Brian just walked up and said, this is what he likes. A little of this, a little bit of that. So now the mechanics and the chassis and everybody goes to work. You get a little 30% of this, you get 41% of that, you get 28% of this. It's in the range. We give a little, we get a little,
Yep.
we give a little.
And then what does he do? He's like, it's in the range. I'm going to go burn laps.
And I'm going to race the living snot out
Right.
of it.
And
Look at like that when he went tabletop flat on that opening lap.
yes.
He expected it to do one thing. It did something different. Thankfully he wrote it out, right? But
Yep.
that's a perfect example of he yeah, maybe he knew that that jump wasn't, he knew what it was going to do, but he's like, I'm going for it. And it
Yep.
made it work. And that's what goes back to you're probably
I
not
could
as good
say
as you think.
conclusively that there are people who win races who are not 100% happy with their bike.
Oh my gosh. Go back. I've had the privilege of working with Jeff Ward, and we talked about like when, and this is for all the fans, especially for the moto dads that are old enough to remember back to O'Mara, Barnett, Wardy, right? So one year you got the Suzuki full floater in 81, that thing everybody thought was the grand poobah. And then what did Mark Barnett go out and do? Won everything. Then 250 comes out, Mark or Ken Howerton wins everything. So now the Suzuki's got the suspension, but Honda's got the horsepower. Then Cowie's lost somewhere in the middle. Then next year, Cowie comes out, horsepower king, still doesn't have the suspension, but it's faster than the RM. But the RM handles well. The reason why Jeff and I were talking about it is you didn't see guys constantly jumping because the new blank was better.
Yeah.
They knew this one was a better motor, but this one handled better. This one had no reliability. This one had great reliability. So at the end of the season, you've got Hannah who finished all the events.
It's frustrating. Like,
yeah,
this is the hard part about our sport. We live in I'm going to call it the 1% where most athletes are living. They need to open their mind that you need to live in the 5%.
At least.
And all of the production 250Fs are capable of winning races, even the Suzuki at the amateur level. If they are 100% all the way through the pro class, you could win races on that thing. Whether or not you believe that is because you believe either in the 1% or the 5%.
Yep.
If you really think that 5% difference is the difference between winning or losing on your motorcycle, you'll never be successful at the pro level because you're never going to the likelihood that you're a Brian Deegan or Peyton Deegan, you make the correct choice to go to a team that has quote unquote, arguably the best equipment.
Yep.
Right. So for example, he was public on the Gypsy Tales.
He was, yeah.
About, hey, do we do this? Do we not do this? Not only is you going to have the best bike when we sign, who's going to have the best bike when we're pro and through? So he made that choice. And luckily for him, I think, and I say luckily, I mean, I don't think there's any luck involved, but I think they probably did pick overall the best platform. Now, there's very strong arguments to be made right now that the other teams have caught up, right? Like I have zero doubt that the Pro Circuit Cowie right now is every bit as fast as the Star bike. I have zero doubt. Look at the results and starts and look at their success of track record. And I also know from plenty of contacts here on the pro side that that bike's really good. Like the Pro Circuit bike, the chassis, the suspension, the handling, like Mitch and his crew, probably mostly his crew these days, and Mitch driving that horse or driving that cart, they hate losing. So they're always developing, right? So whatever advantage Star maybe had, I think is gone. But that said, what are the odds that you go pro and you're going to get the best bike, the best team, the best program? You're going to be smart enough to tell your suspension technician exactly what it needs, and he's going to be smart enough to listen and give you what you need.
Yeah.
Odds are you're not going to have the 1% bike. You're going to have the 5% bike. And if you want to be successful in this world, you have to take the 5% bike and make it work. And I think anybody who's been told otherwise will never be successful. And I see it time in and time again.
Well, and that's just where it makes it easy and convenient to get into the blame game. I didn't win because, it's same thing whether it's on fitness, right? If you're more than 2% dehydrated, you can lose up to 50% of your strength and your endurance. Is that a fitness issue? No, it's a dehydration issue. A dehydrated cell carries less oxygen than a hydrated cell. So if you want to make it easier on yourself to win, but if I weigh you before and after and you lose more than 2%, more than likely you were probably dehydrated before the gate drop. That's not a fitness issue. That's a hydration issue. Yeah. If you didn't graze during and in between motos and you have unstable blood sugar levels, your depth perception is going to be negative, or it's going to be negatively impacted. Now you have inconsistent lap times. It's always the fitness program doesn't work. No, you just didn't.
Have you done this? You're a data guy. Have you guys done some form of a cognitive test pre-post moto?
Yes, we did. Well, we did somewhat. What we did was we did a 20-lap moto. We pulled them in every 2 laps, pricked their finger and took their blood sugar levels, and we took lap times. There was a direct correlation. As blood sugar levels dropped, lap times got slower.
So I think it'd be just fun. We should do this. Every vet should do this. We should come up with a little tiny test that we think of.
Okay.
So I'm sure you would know more than me on this, but like, let's find something that requires some quick, like something they know.
Yeah.
It's something that, is like the hypoxia tests that as you fall off.
Yes. Yep.
I think that'd be hilarious because I'd be willing to bet that if we could post that on maybe your website or something, say, hey, vet riders, all the riders, take this little test and tell me that you're not dropping off. Because it's not, if they, like you said, it's pretty obvious that if the lap time falls off when the blood sugar is falling off, well, there's nothing you can do about that other than fix that problem, right?
Well,
So
but
like,
that's where it goes back to the 5%, ride the damn bike.
yeah,
It's like eat the food, stay hydrated.
right.
It's not a very complicated math
No,
formula.
but I think that'd be hilarious because if we could conclude with guys like, damn, I'm a dumbass after my moto. And I can tell you, I'm the heat of Texas when I've done 35-minute motos
Sure.
back in the day, and you get off the bike, you're half retarded. And I can say that legitimately.
Absolutely.
Like, I
Yeah.
guarantee
Yeah,
you.
your brain isn't all there.
Yeah. And I mean that in the nicest way possible.
Sure.
Like, you're just not 100% there. And it takes you a little
No.
while to recover. And I
Well,
think that
and
there's,
that's where I always say, why would someone step over a dollar to pick up a penny?
right.
You're sending your shocks out when you haven't even found out where your sweet spot
I'll give you
is.
a crazy, yeah, on that. Here's one that it should be very obvious to anybody with any brains, but they never think about it. So
Yep.
I'm gonna so number one, your damping dramatically changes from hot to cold fluid. Okay, like dramatically. Like the viscosity of the
Mhm.
fluid will change by a factor of 2,
Oh,
which means that you
wow.
get half, right? So you get a
Yep.
massive difference. How many people test their bike at the pro level, do you think tested it full 35s? Like when teams are doing suspension testing and they're doing it for outdoors, how many of the actual, how many pros do you think are doing 35s between settings changes?
Oh, next to none.
Right, not enough, right?
No,
So
nowhere near enough.
if you're just going to go do one lap sprints and say, oh, I like this one better, I like that one better, you'll never get it right, right?
Yep.
Because the shock gets hot. So for the average guy watching this channel, most of our, most amateur guys are not doing 25s for the most
Right.
part, right?
Right.
So over a 5-lap moto, it's not as critical, but it is important to realize that your settings pre and like beginning and end of moto are different. If you don't
Absolutely.
know that and can't feel that, then why are you telling me about one click one way or the other way? The
Yeah.
difference in setting between hot and cold shock is 15 to 20 clicks in reality.
Wow.
And you can tell this. Go push on your bike
Mhm.
dead cold. Go ride it for your whole moto and then go push on your bike when it comes in. And you'll be like, whoa, it's like I
What
completely
happened?
changed
Yeah,
the settings.
that would happen. Yeah.
There's no way around the physics of that.
Yep.
We have not found a way, and people don't understand this. Like, for example, you build a really stiff shock, okay, like a stiffer shock. It will be hotter. The shock and the fluid will be hotter than a softer shock, as
Mhm.
long as the softer shock's not bottom. So
Sure.
because then the bottoming is damping going into your chassis, into your, not into the fluid. Well, what is damping? Damping is heat conversion. So the stiffer I make that shock, the more heat energy I produce because I'm taking kinetic energy, which is the wheel and chassis moving, and I'm converting it into heat. That's what damping is.
Okay.
If you don't, oh man, my shock's getting hot. I had so-and-so do it. It's hotter than it ever been. Well, is it a stiffer setting? It better be hotter.
Gotta be hotter. Yeah.
It better be. If it's
Yeah.
not, then it's not a stiffer setting. Plain and simple. Sorry,
Yeah.
don't know what to tell you. So that's the thing that people need to grasp. But like if you can't tell the difference between pre and into the moto, and I can't. I mean, if I were to go back and forth cold shock and then already a preheated shock, I could. But over the course of the moto, I'm not capable of like telling you, oh yeah, I felt it. Now, over when I was doing 35s, I could be like, yeah, late in the moto, my shock got super wallowy and the whoops, it was bad and it was, whatever. So then you have to go back and say, okay, well, is it a setting that I want to change because it's early enough in the moto that it's going to help me? Or is it a setting that I'm going to leave because I'll just deal with the problem late in the moto?
Well,
Right.
and this is where I like to always integrate the the motor and the suspension with the rider. Because if my rider is starting the moto properly hydrated, they carry more oxygen. If they've been grazing and they start the moto with proper blood sugar levels, they're going to have the cognizant ability to make line choices based on the fact that the bike's going to change 20 minutes into a 30-minute moto. If your blood sugar is dropping, you can't think coherently. That's when you end up yard darting yourself.
And to parents, we talked about this, I think one of our early shows, but
Yep.
if you go and just berate your child after a moto right after, like I said, their brain's not working right yet if it's a long, hot
Mhm.
moto.
Yep.
Everybody needs a little bit of time there so that their brain can come back. Why weren't you changing your lines? And he sits at you and he goes, I don't know. Because in that exact moment, sitting in that
He
chair,
doesn't.
he
Yeah,
doesn't
he
know.
doesn't know. He doesn't
He
know his
can't know.
name.
Yeah. So just got to
Yeah.
give them a minute, guys. And then they can process what you talked about because that's one of those things you just have to understand. Now, granted, if the rider's properly hydrated, if the rider's properly fed, and he rides within the limits that he knows are his max, he'll come off the track and be fairly functional.
Well, that's why people will laugh at me in a jovial way. What my riders go racing, we do not want to go above 85% effort.
Yep.
For this exact reason.
Yep.
You can't keep up with the production of energy. You can't dissipate. You can, but you become less and less efficient at that
It's
top.
exponential.
Yeah. And then when you look at the whole idea that, like, for example, if you go, we've done some research on this. If you look at the days that most people get hurt, it's usually Friday and Sunday. And
Latest in the
people,
week,
people
most
go,
tired.
exactly. And they
Right.
go, well, what do you think I am? Soft? No. You've raised a family all week. You've been running your business all week. You've been working all week. You've been trying to cross train during the week, and you're so damn excited to go ride your dirt bike on the weekend. Now you end up working on your bike late on Friday night. You're so excited to go, you go to bed at 10, but you can't fall asleep because you're like Christmas morning for you. So you get 4 hours of sleep. You can't wait to get to the track. You don't warm up. You go right out there and you yard dart yourself.
Yep.
Depth perception isn't brain. There's no physical warm up, so you don't get vasodilation. The perception of speed is not there. The depth perception isn't there. So all of that excitement now gets wadded up in the first 15 minutes you're there. We've done all the stats on it.
Yeah.
Usually it's the first moto, and it's usually a byproduct of not warming up. And the other extreme is it's always one more session. And
Yeah,
that's when they
everybody
get
says that
yard
one more,
darted.
I'm just going to go out,
Yep.
especially after a great day, right? Man, I'm just having a great day.
I'm
I
gonna go
always
throw
call
one
quit
more
while
in.
you're ahead.
Yep.
I really
Always
believe that.
leave the gym knowing you could do more, but chose not to. Leave the track
100%.
knowing you could, but you
A
chose
lot of
not
people
to.
think those gains are made, and they probably are. You would know, but oh, that last extra 1%. But actually, in my opinion, like from a golf standpoint, or like I played competitive golf, and if you're really hitting the ball well that day, and it's just going really well, just quit while you're ahead.
But
Leave on a
always
good
be
note.
able, but always be able to ask what contributed to
No,
that day.
100%, right? But like, you know
Rested,
what?
fed,
If I get more
hydrated,
tired and more
warmed up.
swings and more, I'm going to start degrading.
Well,
I want my
here's the
muscle
hard
memory
part.
to be where it was at its best.
Well, think about Michael Phelps, right? We see him at the end of a journey,
Yeah,
Olympics,
yeah,
even the first one, right?
yeah,
This goes first time at the Olympics. How many hours we refer to it as athletic maturity? Every time he does a lap in the lane, he's more educated, he's fitter.
yeah.
Now, people will argue there's a point of diminishing returns, and I agree with that 100%. But we go back to that subject matter expert. You don't need to have every workout be a gut wrenching, bone breaking, because unfortunately, you go backwards.
Yep.
If you go out there at 80 to 85% and you build durability, and then that experience of getting on the gate, maybe getting beat, learning how to deal with adversity, getting fit, getting to the front, banging bars with guys you never thought you were capable of, builds durability, builds athletic maturity, a little more experience. Yeah, you're still getting seconds and thirds, but you're racing against the guys at nationals are constantly there. You do that for 3, 4, 5 years. Well, now you've fallen in love with the process, not the result. You understand how to overcome adversity. More importantly, you know what you've done to be able to do it consistently. That builds momentum. Now we get into that slippery C word, confidence. Momentum creates confidence. What's Jeff Emig say? He would always prefer momentum over a points lead. He says that all the time, right?
Right.
So you start putting all that together selfishly from an athletic standpoint. Yes, I'm always going to ask you to be at an 80 to 85% race effort, because what if you stall the bike? Well, if you're already at 95%, when you do get the bike cranked up, especially if you have to pick it up, you cannot pick up the same speed that you went down at
No.
because you're without oxygen, hence the word anaerobic.
Yep.
You're going to slow down by 10 or
And
15
the crash
seconds.
probably made you go anaerobic to begin with. Any crash, is a good
100%.
one. Yep.
Well, maybe not 100%, but pretty darn close.
Yep.
And then I'll be somewhat of a jerk here. Usually the crash is the bike's not balanced, and or you weren't aware of where are you front wheel heavy.
Right.
I'm thinking of the braking bumps into that left hander before the mechanics area at Loretta's. Just as nasty
Yep.
as those braking bumps are, the ruts, they never go through straight. They always end
Nope.
up being somewhat
Hooked and messed up.
You're always flat tracking coming out of it. Then you're trying to come from flat tracking left to then shift and go right over that little anthill.
Yep.
Right. That's proprioceptive balance. But now we're back to, are you riding a bike that's balanced, and then you're just a throttle jockey that's staying in the middle?
Well, and like on the suspension front. So when I'm starting to get to know the Brazos really well, we're at Freestone. This was year 2. So after he won his first Loretta's title with us in D, went to A, and unfortunately he left. He broke his collarbone in the burnout area doing a practice start before the first moto and didn't race.
Oh,
Which is a whole, and he's not the type that's like an idiot, right? He's already a pro class racer at this point.
Yeah.
It's just rough luck. But
wow.
it is an example of shit can happen that you don't want to have happen. And that literally almost derailed the entire year. Cause you think about it, where that happens at, and then how long that recovery is, and then your areas or regionals and Reddit, it just was not a good time. But
No.
long and short, we were after the pits. One of his Riggins, actually, last name, nice kid, nice dad, nice family, great kid, good rider. He was B class at the time. I think around a 15th place kid in B, like at the time. And I think this last year, the year before, something like that, I think he got like 5th in B at Loretta's. Like the kid
Okay.
can snow.
Yeah.
You know, came in after one of the practices, like, man, my suspension, blah, 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 blah. And basically, Freestone in particular, like Loretta's, is a very unique, challenging track where it has these pretty gnarly braking bump sections, but then it has these really slow, like roller G out drop offs. They're like really, really slow. And what happens there, and then they have these whoops that are relatively slow now, and some other stuff. And then they have, you know, whatever. So suspension is velocity sensitive. The faster you go, the stiffer it gets. And the harder you hit, the stiffer it gets. It's actually great, right? You need that. It's sensitive to how hard you hit something. You hit it hard, it's a little stiffer. You hit it softer, it's a little softer. It's great. But when you hit like a pretty serious G out at a very low speed, so like a roller that just drops 2 feet or 3 feet, your suspension is usually too soft. And that's because if you really stiffen those areas up, it just makes everything else way too stiff. Now, Supercross is actually that type of load, so that suspension is built around that. That's actually why Supercross suspension is so stiff. It's stiff for those G outs and transitions. It's not actually, you don't want it stiff for those bumps, right?
Gotcha.
Those G outs and transitions. And so that's why it's so stiff. But that's why outdoor suspension is not that stiff, because if you do that, you end up with Supercross suspension. That's the trade-off. So he was like, you know, this, that. I'm like, dude, you can have it. And I was like, look, you'll never get it perfect. I was like, I've ridden this track a whole lot. It's a local track, this track to us. That was my number one complaint when I first started coming to this track. I was like, and I started trying to click on my bike to make my bike better. The reality was, nope, make the bike the best it can be on average and just deal with it. You're going to have to deal with the G outs, or if you stiffen up for the G outs, you're going to have to deal with the braking bumps. So for me, there's like 3 or 4 G outs on the track. You just live with it and you have the bike good everywhere else. And it was funny because I said it. I was like, nope, you're just gonna have to live with it. Your suspension cannot do both. And I didn't know David that well at the time, and weren't suspension clients of mine. And he goes, that's it. He's like good friends with the Riggins were. And he goes, that's exactly damn right. Somebody need to tell you that, And so it was funny because basically, David had been down this road, right? Plenty of times. And every rider wants the same exact thing. I have yet to meet a rider who doesn't want their suspension to be both stiffer and softer at the same time. You find me a rider who doesn't want their suspension to do everything under the sun, and it's just how it works. So that's how the world works. But
that's good stuff.
So that's how I do bike setup. Long story short,
no, it's fantastic.
Start with a stock bike,
I learned a lot.
Stay in a window,
and
you find your window, and then now we try to build. If we're outside of the window, let's build the bike into the window we need it to do. Would be how I would say that.
No, it's brilliant. And like I said, I've got some more questions. So on our next show, I'm gonna continue to go down this, because the amount of people that have hit me up, wanting this type of information. And I just appreciate you sharing your deductive, no pun intended, the reverse engineering of this, because that's what you are by trade. And it's always cool because I live in a world of physiology, understand the why. In the world of physics, that's your world, the why. Like I say, you give a little to get a little, and finding the right balance. And then of course our wheelhouse is to make sure that, you might have to absorb those G outs. They're going to suck. But it's no different than choosing a tire choice. You're either going to get it here, or you're going to lose it over there, or you're going to get it here and lose it over there. But
it's interesting in the tire choice thing. We talked about this, and I would challenge every single person listening to the show, because we're going to line up a tire test. I bought all the tires. I need to mount them all on one bike versus rims. Then I'm going to go find a bunch of guys with the same brand bike, KTM, because it's KTM Husky gas, bigger pool, right?
Yeah.
And I want to go test tires. I don't think any outlet has ever done it. A real tire test. Like, there's 6 of them compared on the same day, same track with 6 riders. And then we'll go to another track, right? And do 2 conditions, early morning, late in the day. Like, let's do it all. Because I don't know. I mean, I've ridden different tires, but when you ride tires, you go buy a new tire. You take off usually a used, worn out set of tires, and then you go put it on, and you're like, oh yeah, it feels different. Well, the tire was used. It was probably at the end of its usable life. You talk to the tire. I don't know how accurate this is or not. It makes sense to me. You talk to the tire reps, and they say, a lot of people don't change front tires as often as rear, because they don't chunk knobbies as often, and they don't wear out as quickly. And the tire reps are like, oh no, at the pro level, you got to change the front tire no matter what, because the
Hmm.
front tire is the casing is wearing out and getting soft. And this is obvious. You take a tire off, new and old, and you push on it, and you're like, oh wow, the old tire is soft and the new tire is stiff.
Yep.
Well, they're saying that the tire guys tell you that that's really what wears out is the casing. And this is true, we're all guilty of it. You look at a rear tire, you say, oh, it rounded the edge off. I'm not getting any drive. It's not giving me any bite. Well, you talk to the tire guys and they go, yeah, that really doesn't matter for the bite, because the knobby
Surface
like
area.
this, when it
Hmm.
gets accelerated on, lies flat against the
Yep.
tire. And so this whole face is what's gripping.
Yep.
And
It's the
so,
surface area.
yeah, it has nothing to do with this leading edge that you think is biting, because that's not how they work. What
Right.
really matters is the casing. And of course, the knob height matters. As it
Sure.
shrinks down and goes down, it's a problem. And then, like on the high end tires, the spec tires, they'll chunk knobbies in 30 minutes, 35 minutes. That's because
Yep.
they're designed to. You're supposed to get everything out of that tire you can get out of it in 35 minutes.
Hmm.
Our consumer tires are not that way. So a lot of times a consumer tire will last much longer on the knobby side than its actual casing side
Casing
lasted.
itself.
And you just don't know that. So for example, I want to do this tire test, and I challenge your viewers. I would, if they have the funding, if it's something they want to play around with, if you have 3 or 4 bikes, you have 3 sets of wheels, go do it.
Yeah.
Our industry has just come down to a spec tire essentially. Yep, everybody runs a Dunlop, great, and they run them all the MX34s or 30, what the current tire is, or the 3S, whatever they like. Nobody runs hardpack tires anymore, ever. I don't see it at
Mhm.
Loretta's. I don't see it anywhere I go. I'm like, that's a hardpack track. You should maybe consider a hardpack tire. The McGrath era, he ran hardpack tire in the sand because that's what he liked. But it's
Mhm.
like, they do sell that tire, and I know why. The pro side, all the pros run the one tread pattern. But I do not think that I would love to know. We're going to find out, at least for us. We're going to do
Absolutely.
it. It's going to be on YouTube video. I think it's going to be a cool video. But I'm challenged. Like, have you guys actually tested tires? And then how many of your clients have actually really, truly tested tire pressure?
Yeah, I love it because these are the things that I talk about at my performance camps. It's the marginal gains of 1%. And the one that I always go to is you slap a bigger chain, you throw a bigger sprocket on the back, forget to tell little Johnny and Susie, wheelbase is shorter, loop out Larry on the start. Everybody's mad, all because nobody communicated. So I can't even imagine when you get a tire pressure, setting the sag,
Think
all
how
the
many
different
settings
things.
there are.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's exponential. I mean, we did like 5 or 6.
Yep.
Five, what is it? 10 to the 5. Then we're talking like it's a
Exactly.
crazy number. And tire pressure, I will say, has as big of an influence in overall suspension feel than suspension. Like you
Well,
go, everybody's done this. I've done it. You put a new set of tires on, and the way we like to do it at the shop is we'll air them up to 20. Wear them up to 20 so that I can air down at the track.
sure.
I don't need to go pump it up, right? You forget, you get in a rush, you're talking to your buddy, you're super excited to get on the track. You're like, something is wrong with my bike. And you're like, it's way wrong. Like
Yep.
it's stiff and it's harsh and it's not hooking up, and my chassis is messed up. You're like, did I change anything? And you go turn your clicks out and you go back out and you're like, bike is shit,
Yep.
and then it dawns on you. You're like, oh, I'm a dumbass. I didn't set my tire pressure today. And
That's
so you go
right.
set your tire pressure, and all of a sudden you're like, well, now I got to put my clickers back. And it's a totally
Yep.
different motorcycle. So, and then a Dunlop guy said this years ago, and he said, hey, get a good tire gauge. This is really, really, really true. Your tires are 0 to 15 PSI, maybe 20 if you're off road, but let's just say 0 to 15 PSI. Essentially, a 1 PSI change is not quite a 10% change, but it's
Pretty close.
pretty close.
Yep.
10% is something that we're actually worth talking about,
Yep.
right? Like we're not talking about 1%. We're talking about 10%. So when you go change tire pressures, half a pound is actually a significant number. And you got to
Absolutely.
understand that it's not just, half a pound matters in tire pressure. So yeah, I mean, if you haven't tested tire pressures, number one, you have to understand that yes, you might like the grip of 10 PSI on the rear tire, but you might start causing flat issues or tire degradation issues. So that's an area you have to be careful in. But that said,
Sure.
you really should go test. You should test 10 to 15 or 11 to 15 and really see what you like. And we found, you guys are really tied in with Dunlop really heavily. We found with a Pirelli tire back in the day, the U.S. market who came from Dunlops, if they bought one, hated them. And it's because those tires, especially the front, really liked 14, 15 PSI. And a Dunlop guy's like, I run 12 and a half. Well,
Yeah.
unless you're willing to try 14 or 15, you're just going to think that tire's trash. And I think that's, really why you got to explore that.
Sure.
All right, man.
Well, this has been really, really helpful. I know I got a lot out of it, and I know based on the questions that I got at Glen Helen and at Loretta's this year, definitely we next show, episode number 11, we will keep these questions going on the mechanical side. Um, for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, feel free to leave us some questions below if you're
Yeah,
listening to
ask a
this.
bike question, put it in
Yeah,
the comments, and we'll get to it.
we'll definitely get to every question that's posed. I know a lot of you guys are a little embarrassed leaving questions. You've told me that. That's fine. DM us. We're happy to help. Before we wrap up, Derek, I just want to, the number of subscribers continues to grow quite exponentially. I just want to personally thank you for being willing to share your knowledge. I think it was on show number 2. You said you were surprised how many people gave you kind comments, but you said, but there's a lot of smart guys like me out there. I thought that was a very humble thing to say, but if you got anything out of today's show, this knowledge is something that we want to equip you guys with. And, if you're looking to get motor work or get suspension work done, please seriously give Derek some consideration. That's not part of our show here. This is me just talking from the heart here. Derek, I thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, especially setting up the bike. I mean, I only got to one of my 10 questions. The others
It's
actually
funny
will
you say
build
that. Is
off of
like
them.
I get worked up talking about bikes. I get a higher
Absolutely.
voice. I get excited. Like
Yep.
it's definitely it's an emotionally charged issue for me, which is weird because I'm not that type of guy. But
Yep.
it definitely, so we only got to one today because the answers can be as complicated as you want them to be. Right?
Absolutely. Well,
Well,
what we
next
say,
time
you
we'll try
have
to
to
rapid
say,
fire it. Right?
well, no, I don't think we need to. I think based on the feedback I've gotten from the subscribers and the listeners, they like the context because it's not just, hey, go 2 clicks stiffer. Hey, soften it up here. It's an if then that has a lot of variables. And from what I've gotten on the feedback being at the track and stuff, this is what is causing people to gravitate towards it. So I'm going to politely disagree with you live here on the show. We won't rush through it because that's what our listeners like about it is that you walk through the if then scenarios. And man, I can only imagine the amount of dads who said, if I'd heard this when I was racing as a kid, how much would it have been? How much of a difference would it have made in my results? Not
Well,
saying
think
it
of
had
Tony
been
Alessi on our show, right? He did what
absolutely.
I'm talking about.
Yep.
So he could give you a wealth of knowledge now. But had he
Absolutely.
gotten that blueprint on day one, they already won everything they could win. But you know what I mean? Like
But
if
that
he
wasn't
knew about
accidental either.
Supercross now, Mike
Yeah.
probably would have been a title contender, right? He just
Well,
didn't know it.
he said it on the show. He wished
Yeah.
he'd never gone to Loretta's and only focused on Supercross whoops.
100%. And
You
I'm not
know?
saying that, but I can say with conclusively that he's probably not wrong. So
No. And if we can help hedge other parents down the right path, if you really think you've got that top 1% athlete and you're looking at the quickest way to get from point A to point C in the straightest line possible, that's what the show's all about. So, Derek, thank you again. Want to thank our friends at Precision Transport for making this show happen. Until then, guys, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Be safe.
thanks, Coach.